And I'd like to kick off by asking you about this fantastic project that you're working with, which is called Impossible. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So we set up the company, I'll say 4 years ago maybe now, and initially looking at how we can use tech to solve social issues. And we started off with a kind of very singular idea, which is about enhancing community and connecting communities. That's still running, and then we started developing other products. And now we kind of call ourselves an incubator along those terms, so tech for good, and we do products that are our own ideas, and then we work with other companies to help them develop products.
Cool. And one of the things that you've mentioned before is this idea of planet-centric design, which is a very curious and beguiling term. Can you tell us what that is and how you bring that into being in the work that you do?
Well, from our quick chat in the green room, it sounds like you're very familiar with user-centric design, which is a kind of common methodology for designing tech products and sometimes hardware products, which is usually thinking about the user and the user's needs and really designing things around the individual, the human. And we wanted to reframe that conversation and that kind of design thinking to make sure that the planet is put into the equation in the process of designing. The environmental kind of situation and crisis is probably my biggest concern day to day, and I think that it's fundamental that business and that technology is thinking about solutions, not just the kind of NGO and sometimes when it's convenient for them, the political sphere.
And so when we're talking about changing the conversation around that, a lot of it is linked into positive stories, representation in the media of businesses that are making great leaps forward in that kind of technology that does consider the wider ecosystem. What do you think is the importance of positive stories in the media and getting us to think a bit more closely about how we can change our own behaviour with relationship to the planet and the systems that we interact with?
Sure. So, well, on Impossible we had a media channel for a couple of years looking exactly at positive news and positive storytelling. We now turn that into a magazine that we produce annually. And I'm in the beginning process of writing a book actually on optimism. The reason for doing that and for that interest is because I feel like there are so many positive, optimistic things that are happening, and we don't hear enough about them. And I feel like I'm kind of optimistic until the end, right? It's a better way to live, and it's more likely that we'll end up in an optimistic trajectory by focusing on the positive and by focusing on the solutions and by championing those. And obviously, you know, 99.9% of the media is selling us negative stories, and I think that distorts our actual ability to see reality in a clear way. And that potentially could lead to more apathy, and it potentially could, you know, lead to more kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. So yeah, we're trying to push a little bit against that curve and point out the many, many, many organisations and people and ideas that are coming out in a more positive way.
Yeah, and the point about apathy I think is really important. I think earlier we had someone mention Hannah Arendt and talk about how the banality of evil comes through when people are so overwhelmed with false information that they just take their hands away and just say, okay, I can't cope with this, let's just step back. And one of the ways in which we've seen this in the media is I suppose the overwhelming content that we're bombarded with, that we're not sure whether it's real, whether it's not real, whether we can trust the sources or not. And one of the things I know that you've been involved in your capacity on the advisory board is Wiki Tribune, which is a very exciting attempt to kind of try and rebalance some of this. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So Jimmy Wales, founder kind of infamously of Wikipedia, has been on the board of Impossible for many years, and maybe like five years ago or something, at the very, very early stages, he told me about this idea he had for citizen-led journalism, kind of essentially Wikipedia for the news. And I spent a few years, I'm not trying to take credit, but I spent a few years, every few months being like, hey, what about that idea? I feel like it's like a really good idea. And about a year ago, he decided to really take it seriously and has put kind of all his time and energy and some investment into making that real. So at Impossible, we helped with the early stages of thinking that through and designing that, and helped him launch it through a crowdfunding platform. It's been incredibly successful to date. I mean, he's had a huge kind of response on the crowdfunding side in terms of people's engagement with the idea and, you know, people subscribing on a monthly basis to support the platform before there was ever anything even to support or that was real. So definitely the appetite is there, and now they have a team of people working on it. If you go to wikitribune.com, you'll see. I think the the thinking behind it is multi-layered. How do you create a more neutral news space when 75% of British newspapers are owned by billionaires, when every single national paper in the US is owned in part or in whole by a billionaire? Nothing against billionaires, but there's something structurally maybe problematic about the vested interest that would imply, and arguably the media has a huge, huge impact on everything from our politics to our kind of corporate responsibility, to the way we think as a culture and as a species. So can we start carving out more neutral news spaces? I've always loved The Guardian because when you look at their ownership model, it's very pure, and I think there's something that can be trusted in that it is owned by a charity. And I think Wicked Tribune is trying to create a trusted space in the way that you might criticize Wikipedia for, you know, having factual errors occasionally, but they have managed to retain somewhat a neutral kind of trust, which is not politicized, and is also not politicized by advertising, which I think is interesting and again quite unique in the media landscape. So he's trying to replicate that. The first platform that we ever developed, which was the community tool for connecting communities to share, has just been adopted by an organization called Humankind. Well, run by a different organisation, but it's called Humankind, and they're using the technology to look at the refugee use case in the UK, and so connecting refugee organisations with volunteers. So I think that's an interesting adaptation of that idea.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, this is sort of taking it a little bit out of the ballpark, but I wonder with another conversation that's kind of linked with tech and responsibility and ethics, and the idea that jobs are getting automised. And so people are going to have potentially, I mean, who knows, but potentially fewer jobs to go to. Whether organisations such as this, that allow people to be pro-social, to volunteer, might actually help us get into a mentality where we can do things together to create better good in society using technology, where the technology is in service of a vision as opposed to the other way around.
Well, I just actually wrote, or collaborated on an article with the National Geographic that just recently came out online, querying actually this whole premise that tech is a force for good. And I'm still on the fence about this. I think that tech can solve a lot of our problems, and we should, you know, see where the road leads us. At the same time, there are also a huge number of problems that technology is creating in terms of socially our addiction to it, isolation, anxiety, but also ecologically in terms of the genuine kind of major footprint that the devices we use have. And I think it's important to be open-minded to the fact that tech might also be causing a lot of problems. So I'm not a full tech utopian.